Most people think they know Cher, the goddess of pop, the Oscar winner, the glittering icon who defied time, reinvented herself with every decade, and outlived every trend.
To give up other things, like, in my business, you have to give up a lot to get what you want.
But what if that story, the one you've seen in music videos, red carpets, and glossy interviews, was only half the truth? Behind the wigs and wild outfits, behind the awards and sold-out tours, is a woman who's lived through poverty, heartbreak, betrayal, and illness. A woman who was sent to an orphanage as a toddler, held her shoes together with rubber bands in school, and stood beside the coffin of the man who once built her career and then broke her. Cher's life isn't just about reinvention. It's about survival. It's about losing everything again and again and still finding the strength to start over. From teenage dropout to chart topper, from TV darling to bankrupt divorcee, from tabloid joke to Academy Award winner, her journey is a masterclass in resilience. But there are parts of her story even her most devoted fans don't know. The child she couldn't reach, the illness that nearly silenced her voice, the eulogy that brought a stadium of mourners to tears, and the quiet, personal moments of pain that unfolded far away from flashing lights and screaming fans. This isn't the story of Cher, the icon. This is the story of Cher, the woman. And once you hear it, you'll never see her the same way again.
Anyone, any advice, but especially women, just don't believe no. I just don't believe no. When someone tells me no, I just don't believe it.
Long before she was Cher, she was just a little girl trying to make sense of a world that never stayed still. Her name was Cherylyn Sarkeesian, and her childhood looked nothing like the glamorous stages she would one day dominate. Born in 1946 in El Centro, California, Cher's life began with instability built right into the foundation. Her parents, Georgia Holt and John Sarkeesian, were young and wildly different. Georgia, a teenager working at a donut shop, had dreams of becoming a singer and actress. John, a charming Armenian-American truck driver, had a magnetic presence but wasn't built for lasting commitment. They married quickly, too quickly, and split just as fast. By the time Cher was 10 months old, her parents had already separated for good. And just like that, the sense of family began to fracture. Georgia tried to make it work. She gave the marriage another shot, briefly reuniting with John before realizing it was a mistake. That decision would leave Cher without a steady father figure, and Georgia chasing security in all the wrong places. Over the years, Georgia married a total of 7 times, twice to Cher's biological father, and Cher's life became a carousel of stepfathers, new homes, and vanished promises.
All force. Okay.
Is someone else in the room?
No. Well, sometimes. Okay. So
None of them lasted, but one man, actor John Southall, stood out. He became a sort of father figure during her early years, but even that stability was short-lived. By age 9, even that marriage had ended. Cher wasn't just dealing with emotional whiplash, he was living it. With her mother struggling to make ends meet while chasing her own dreams in Hollywood, Cher's early life teetered on the edge of poverty. At one point, Georgia had no choice but to place Cher in a Catholic orphanage so she could look for work and stable housing. For a toddler, being separated from her mother, no matter the reason, left a mark. When she wasn't in the orphanage, Cher and her half-sister Georganne bounced between relatives' homes and their grandparents' care. Their lives were stitched together with temporary fixes, new schools, unfamiliar faces, and zero certainty. Financial hardship wasn't just a passing phase. It was constant. Cher has spoken about how deeply ashamed she felt of her worn-out clothes, how she would get in trouble for scuffing her shoes because there simply wasn't money to buy new ones. She vividly remembered using rubber bands to hold her shoes together during school. One week, they were scraping by on canned beans. The next, her mother landed a small gig, and they were living in Beverly Hills. That whiplash between hunger and Hollywood dreams gave Cher an early, haunting understanding of what life without a safety net looked like. It wasn't just confusing, it was traumatic. Yet even in that chaos, there were threads of identity and strength forming. Her Armenian heritage, passed down from her father, gave her a unique cultural pride. She might not have known him well, but that part of her bloodline never faded. And watching her mother push through rejection, failure, and financial strain to chase a nearly impossible dream left a different kind of impression. Georgia Holt may not have found fame, but she modeled something just as powerful: the refusal to give up. This was the world Cher came from, not glittering stages, but survival mode. Her sense of self was forged in uncertainty, not applause. And as she would later prove, those unstable beginnings didn't break her. They built the foundation for a woman who would rise, fall, and rise again, no matter how many times the world told her she couldn't. As Cher moved into her teenage years, the instability of her childhood followed her like a shadow. She wasn't just different, she felt different. Her looks made her stand out. She had striking features, long dark hair, and a sharp presence that made people stare, but not always in a good way. In a sea of blonde-haired, blue-eyed classmates, Cher never quite fit the mold. And while others were worrying about grades or weekend plans, she was daydreaming about stages, costumes, and music that moved people. She didn't want a normal life. She wanted an extraordinary one. The only problem? No one around her took those dreams seriously. School was a battlefield, not just socially but academically. Cher struggled with undiagnosed dyslexia and learning challenges that left her feeling frustrated and misunderstood. Reading was difficult. Writing didn't come easily. Back then, there were no support systems, no awareness campaigns, just harsh teachers, bad grades, and labels like underachiever. One of her report cards cruelly noted that she wasn't living up to her potential, a phrase that stung because deep down, she knew she was capable, just not in the ways they measured. Her confidence took hit after hit, but her imagination never stopped working. At night, she would lie awake envisioning a different life. One where she was famous, one where she wore the clothes she wanted, sang the songs in her head, and didn't have to explain herself to anyone. While her classmates were figuring out what colleges to apply to, Cher was mentally designing her future wardrobe and practicing her Oscar speech in the mirror. Her dreams weren't a phase. They were her only compass. And then, at just 16 years old, she made a decision that would change everything. She dropped out of high school. No diploma, no backup plan, just ambition. She packed up and moved to Los Angeles, a city that devours the hopeful and spits out the rest. But Cher wasn't just hoping. She was ready to work. She started crashing parties, hanging out on music sets, looking for any way to get a foot in the door. That's when fate introduced her to Sonny Bono. At first, it was nothing romantic. Sonny was older and already connected to the music scene, working for the legendary producer Phil Spector. Cher moved into his apartment, but not as a girlfriend. She was hired as a housekeeper. Their bond started as practical. She needed shelter. He needed help. But there was something between them that neither could ignore. Sonny had industry knowledge and hustle. Cher had raw presence. Together, they were like flint and steel. Something was bound to ignite. Their connection deepened, professionally and personally. Cher began singing background vocals on tracks produced by Spector, standing behind stars like the Ronettes and the Righteous Brothers. But it wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted to be seen. Sonny saw it too. He started crafting songs that showcased her voice, deep, rich, and unlike anything else on the radio. What started as a practical arrangement quickly turned into a musical partnership, and then a romantic one. The chemistry was undeniable. They were quirky, offbeat, magnetic. When they performed, people stopped and listened. Their energy wasn't polished, but it was real. And real was what the world was craving in the middle of the cultural chaos of the 1960s. Cher had gone from being the invisible girl who couldn't read aloud in class to the face of a movement. But fame was still a few steps away. For now, they were just Sonny and Cher, two misfits trying to prove they had something worth hearing. What came next would change music and her life forever. By 1965, Cher's dreams were no longer daydreams. They were charting. I Got You, Babe, her breakout hit with Sonny Bono, shot straight to the top of the Billboard charts and instantly made the duo household names. Overnight, they transformed from hungry outsiders into symbols of the counterculture movement. Sonny with his mop of hair and mustache, and Cher, tall, dark, and cool as ice, didn't look like typical stars. That was their magic. They were different, and the world was finally ready for different. Their clothes were wild, their humor was fresh, and their chemistry was unmistakable. It felt like the perfect love story unfolding in real time. But that's what the cameras saw. Behind the scenes, the picture was far more complicated. Their fame soared with follow-up hits like The Beat Goes On and Baby Don't Go, and their distinct dynamic, a short, assertive Sonny and a sharp-tongued, glamorous Cher, became a brand. But like any brand, it needed maintenance. As their popularity exploded, so did the pressure to stay relevant, to keep smiling, to keep selling the illusion. What fans didn't know was that Cher had little say in the business decisions being made. Sonny controlled nearly everything, from contracts to creative direction to their finances. On stage, they were equal. Off stage, he called the shots. When their music career began to slow down in the late 60s, Sonny found a new way to keep their brand alive: Las Vegas. Reinventing themselves as a live nightclub act, they leaned into comedy, banter, and variety-style performances. The transition worked. People loved the new act, and so did television executives. By 1971, the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour premiered and became an immediate success. It was bright, funny, and felt like a window into a playful marriage. America couldn't get enough. Cher, now fully stepping into her power, became known for her quick wit and icy jabs. Many aimed playfully at Sonny himself. What viewers didn't realize was that these jokes sometimes carried an edge of truth. Behind the laughter and perfect punchlines, their personal relationship was crumbling. Fame had magnified everything: their differences, the control imbalance, and the emotional disconnect. Both had begun seeing other people, but they stayed together for the sake of the show, the brand, and the illusion. They lived in the same house, but in different emotional worlds. The cracks weren't just forming, they were widening fast. In 1973, Sonny privately admitted in a diary entry that the only thing keeping them together was the image of being together. By 1974, that image shattered. Cher filed for divorce, citing involuntary servitude, a legal term that underlined how little control she had over their business and money. It shocked fans who believed in the Sonny and Cher fantasy. But for Cher, it was the beginning of a painful wake-up call. She had given everything: her youth, her talent, her trust, and she walked away with almost nothing. What made it worse was the realization that she wasn't just emotionally drained, she was financially trapped. Sonny had placed most of their earnings and contracts under his name. When the partnership ended, Cher discovered she had almost no money of her own. The woman the world saw draped in sequins and glitter was, behind the curtain, broke and starting from scratch. She had to borrow money just to survive. It was a bitter irony. At the height of her fame, she was back at square one. That divorce didn't just end a marriage. It marked the collapse of everything she had built since she was 16. She was no longer Sonny and Cher. She was just Cher. No business partner, no money, no guaranteed future. For the first time in years, she had to face the spotlight alone. But the world had no idea what kind of storm she was walking into next. After her divorce from Sonny Bono in 1975, Cher wasn't just starting over. She was doing it in front of an audience that had only ever known her as half of a duo. For years, her identity had been tied to someone else. Now, she had to stand on her own. No manager, no husband, no partner pulling the strings. For the first time in her adult life, she was free. But freedom came with a terrifying cost: failure. Her first solo television show, simply titled Cher, was a gamble. Networks weren't sure she could carry a show by herself. But when it premiered, she proved them wrong. Audiences loved it. Her quick wit, stunning stage presence, and ability to deliver both comedy and heartbreak made her a solo star. But just as her TV career found new life, her music career fell into a tailspin. Without Sonny as her creative and business guide, and with the industry shifting around her, Cher was struggling to find her voice in a world that had already moved on. Her 1975 album Stars barely made a dent on the charts. Her next effort, I'd Rather Believe in You in 1976, completely flopped. It didn't even chart. Critics dismissed her. Fans didn't connect with the songs. The woman who had once dominated radio now couldn't get a single hit. But Cher didn't back down. She pushed forward with Cherished in 1977, a desperate attempt to recapture some of her past momentum. But again, the result was silence. No airplay. No buzz. Just another failure added to a growing pile. At the same time, her personal life was unraveling just as quickly. In a whirlwind decision made only 3 days after finalizing her divorce from Sonny, Cher married Gregg Allman, the legendary frontman of the Allman Brothers Band. Their marriage lasted just 9 days before Cher filed for separation. She had stepped from one chaotic relationship into another, and this one came with its own set of shadows: addiction, volatility, and a world far removed from the polished chaos of Hollywood. But just when it seemed over, they tried again. Cher and Gregg reconciled, fueled by love, hope, and the arrival of something unexpected: news that Cher was pregnant. Their son, Elijah Blue Allman, gave them a second chance at building a real family. But parenting didn't erase the deep issues that existed between them. They gave it everything they had, but the cracks couldn't be sealed. By 1978, they divorced for good. In between the personal upheaval, Cher and Gregg attempted a joint music project titled To the Hard Way, under the name Allman and Woman. The concept was bold. The result was a disaster. Fans didn't understand it. Critics didn't want it. The album disappeared almost as soon as it was released. The image of Cher as a solo artist was slipping further away with each misstep. The woman once known for hit records and ratings gold now couldn't seem to get anything to stick. Warner Brothers dropped her. The music industry seemed finished with her. The press began painting her as a washed-up star grasping for relevance. And through it all, she kept moving. She didn't take a break. She didn't disappear. She fought. She took every failure on the chin and got back up again, even when there was nothing left to prove she could win. This chapter wasn't glamorous. There were no sparkling gowns, no screaming fans, just rejection, debt, and the quiet kind of loneliness that comes when the world forgets you ever mattered. But it was here, in the silence, that Cher's most important transformation began. She wasn't trying to be a pop star anymore. She was trying to survive. And what she did next would prove that the industry hadn't seen the last of her. It had only underestimated her. By the early 1980s, Cher's music career had stalled, her personal life was in pieces, and the industry had all but written her off. She wasn't the hot new star anymore. She wasn't topping charts or headlining arenas. Most people assumed she'd fade away like so many others before her. But Cher was never built for quiet exits. With nothing left to lose, she made the most unexpected move of her life. She became an actress. And not just any actress. A serious one, ready to prove herself in a world that had mocked celebrity crossover attempts for years. When she was offered a supporting role in Silkwood in 1983, many were skeptical. She'd be acting alongside Meryl Streep and Kurt Russell, two Hollywood powerhouses. Nobody thought a former pop star could hold her own. But Cher had something to prove. She dove into the role of Dolly Pellicker, a working-class lesbian navigating tragedy and injustice inside a nuclear facility. It was raw. It was emotional. And it was nothing like the public had ever seen from her. When the film premiered, critics were stunned. Her performance was so powerful, it earned her a Golden Globe win and an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. For the first time in decades, people weren't laughing at her. They were listening. She had shattered the idea that she was just a singer with a sharp tongue and flashy clothes. She could act. She could move an audience without a single note, and she wasn't done. Over the next few years, Cher kept choosing roles that no one expected. In Mask in 1985, she played the strong-willed mother of a son with a severe facial deformity. The role demanded every ounce of her emotional strength, and again, critics took notice. She wasn't chasing glamour. She was chasing truth. Her performances were grounded, human, and brutally honest. And yet, she still hadn't peaked. That came in 1987 with Moonstruck. Playing Loretta Castorini, a widowed Italian-American woman torn between logic and love, Cher found the perfect balance between vulnerability and fire. The film was a warm, funny, deeply moving romantic comedy that allowed her to shine like never before. She wasn't playing a character. She was living inside her. Moonstruck was a critical and commercial hit, and Cher walked away with the Academy Award for Best Actress. This wasn't just a career milestone. It was a cultural shockwave. The woman who had been laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated was now holding an Oscar. She didn't win it by being anyone other than herself. She didn't hide her past, her accent, or her scars. She won it because of them. And yet, what made this moment even more powerful was how far she had come. This was the same girl who had grown up with holes in her shoes, the teenager who couldn't finish high school, the woman who was once so broke after her divorce that she had to borrow money to get by. She had reinvented herself through sheer force of will. No fancy connections, no safety net, just talent, courage, and the ability to stare rejection in the face and say, "Watch me." Winning an Oscar didn't just confirm her talent. It rewrote her story. She was no longer the girl behind the sequins or the former wife of Sonny Bono. She was Cher, Academy Award winner, and she had done it on her own terms. But just as she was reaching the peak of her second act, life was about to hit her with something even she couldn't prepare for. Just when it seemed like nothing could stop her, something did. At the peak of her acting career, with an Oscar in hand and Hollywood finally respecting her as more than a pop culture curiosity, Cher's body began to betray her. It started with fatigue, deep, relentless exhaustion that no amount of rest could fix. At first, she tried to push through. After all, she had always powered past pain before. But this time, it wasn't stress or burnout. It was something darker, something invisible, and it wouldn't go away. While filming The Witches of Eastwick in 1987, Cher began feeling noticeably unwell. At first, the symptoms were subtle: weakness, aching joints, a constant fog that made it hard to focus. But over time, it became impossible to ignore. What started as occasional discomfort soon turned into something that stopped her cold. Doctors eventually diagnosed her with Epstein-Barr virus, a chronic illness that causes extreme fatigue, muscle weakness, and immune system issues. And just like that, the woman who had spent her life fighting to stay relevant, on stage, on screen, in headlines, was forced to step back from everything. For nearly 2 years, Cher disappeared from the spotlight. Not by choice, but because she physically couldn't perform. She couldn't act. She couldn't sing. Her body was too weak, and no one could predict how long it would last. It was one of the few times in her life when she didn't have control, and that terrified her. In a rare and deeply personal interview with the New York Times, she later admitted how devastating that time was. "I was really, really upset about it," she confessed. It wasn't just the illness. It was the isolation, the silence, the sense of being forgotten. She had worked so hard to get to the top, and now she was sidelined by something she couldn't even see. There were no headlines, no photos, no public drama, just the quiet pain of watching opportunities vanish while your body holds you hostage. Behind the closed doors of her home, Cher battled not just Epstein-Barr, but the fear that everything she had rebuilt could crumble once again. She had seen it happen before. Fame is fickle. People move on. One minute you're everyone's favorite comeback story, and the next you're yesterday's headline. And for a woman who had survived multiple career deaths, this one felt the most unfair. Because this time, it wasn't a bad album, or a failed marriage, or a critical flop. It was her health. And that's something even Cher couldn't charm her way out of. The industry, as always, moved on. Roles she was once in line for went to other actresses. Opportunities she had long dreamed about slipped away. But if there's one thing Cher had learned by then, it was how to climb back up, slowly, painfully, one step at a time. When she finally re-emerged, it wasn't with a dramatic announcement or a flashy new project. It was with quiet strength and a familiar determination. She didn't need to prove she was still relevant. She just needed to show she wasn't done yet. And what came next would test her heart even more than her body. Because while she was rebuilding herself in private, something tragic was happening in the life of the man who once changed hers forever. While Cher was quietly rebuilding her life after illness, the man who had once been her partner in music, business, and love was undergoing a reinvention of his own, one no one saw coming. Sonny Bono, Once the butt of Cher's jokes on stage and the more silent half of their superstar duo had left showbiz behind and stepped into a new kind of spotlight: politics. To most, it seemed like a bizarre career move. Sonny had no background in law or government, and yet, by 1988, he had been elected mayor of Palm Springs, California. The same man who once wore matching velvet outfits and lip-synced on national television was now signing city ordinances and cutting ribbons at groundbreakings. But Sonny wasn't playing dress-up. He was serious. He poured himself into public service with the same work ethic that once built a music empire. His charisma, approachability, and no-nonsense attitude resonated with voters. And while critics initially dismissed him as a novelty candidate, he proved them wrong. Sonny took real pride in his role and even pushed forward meaningful reforms in the city. Then, in 1994, he stunned the country again. He ran for Congress and won, representing California's 44th district in the U.S. House of Representatives. Sonny Bono, the former pop star, was now a congressman. Cher watched all of this from afar. Their marriage had ended in pain. Their business partnership had collapsed. And yet, through it all, there was a quiet respect that never fully disappeared. He had been her first everything, her first love, her first heartbreak, her first collaborator. And as strange as his second act seemed to the world, Cher understood it. Reinvention was something they had always shared. Behind the scenes, their relationship had softened. The public jabs were fewer. Time had dulled the bitterness, and mutual history had created a fragile peace. Then came the call that shattered it all. In January 1998, Sonny was vacationing in Aspen, Colorado, when he struck a tree while skiing. The accident was sudden, tragic, fatal. The news broke across television screens and newspapers within hours. Sonny Bono, age 62, was gone. And for Cher, the world stopped moving. She was in London when she got the news. Immediately, she flew back to Los Angeles. And for the first time in decades, she wasn't Cher the icon or Cher the comeback queen. She was just a woman mourning the loss of someone who had once been her whole world. At Sonny's funeral, she stepped up to the podium, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had loved him deeply, even when it hurt. Her eulogy, raw and unscripted, stunned everyone. Through tears, she spoke of his ambition, his belief in her, and the quiet bravery he carried into every phase of his life. "We were Sonny and Cher," she said, her voice trembling, "and that's who we are even now." In that moment, the years of conflict faded. The lawsuits, the betrayals, the bitterness, all of it seemed small compared to the bond they once shared. She didn't speak about their divorce. She didn't bring up the painful end. She honored the beginning, the magic. The man who once took a 16-year-old girl with no direction and turned her into a star. She reminded the world that behind the politics, behind the comedy, behind the music, Sonny Bono was a man who had believed in dreams. It was a moment of full-circle closure. For Cher, it wasn't just a funeral. It was the end of a chapter that had started the moment they met. It was a reminder that love, even when it doesn't last, can still be real. And that the people who shape us, even when they leave, never really disappear. But grief, like illness, doesn't pause a public life. As the world mourned Sonny Bono, Cher would soon find herself facing something even more complicated: her own family legacy and the painful personal struggles of being a mother in the spotlight. For all of Cher's fame, glamour, and unapologetic reinvention, there was one role that remained her most complicated and, perhaps, most human: being a mother. The world saw the sequins, the Oscars, the comebacks. But behind the image was a woman trying to navigate motherhood in a world where privacy was a luxury she could never afford. And no matter how iconic she became, that didn't shield her or her children from the quiet wounds fame can leave behind. Her youngest son, Elijah Blue Allman, born from her stormy relationship with Greg Allman, grew up not in the shadows, but under a glare. From the beginning, his life was shaped by distance. At just 7 years old, he was sent to boarding school. To the world, that might have seemed normal for a touring celebrity parent. But to Elijah, it felt like rejection. Years later, in a 2014 interview, he admitted that the separation at such a young age left a scar, When you go to boarding school at 7 years old, it's kind of hard to feel like you're not being shunned. He said, not with anger, but with the quiet ache of a child who simply needed more time with his mother. And it wasn't just the distance. It was the noise. Cher's public life, the endless headlines, the constant reinvention created a space where emotional closeness was hard to maintain. Elijah spoke candidly about their strained relationship, describing it as a work in progress. In 2013, there was hope. He and his wife moved in with Cher to reconnect. For a moment, the family seemed ready to stitch itself back together. But that fragile bond unraveled once again. Whatever caused the new rift remains private, but the result was the same. Distance returned. Still, Elijah's words weren't filled with blame. In fact, they were laced with admiration. She's really talented. She's gorgeous. I mean, she's Cher. What's not to love? That one sentence said more than any tabloid ever could. The relationship wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real, messy, evolving, unfinished. Her journey as a mother was further tested when her first child, born Chastity Bono, began the deeply personal journey of transitioning. Chastity had long lived in the public eye, appearing on her parents' TV shows as a child. But in the late 2000s, she made the decision to transition and live as Chaz Bono. It was a bold, vulnerable act, one that made headlines around the world. For Cher, who had spent decades standing beside the LGBTQ+ community, this moment hit differently. It was personal, and it wasn't easy. She admitted that she struggled at first. There was confusion, grief, even fear. "I didn't go through it that easily," she told Pride Source years later. She wasn't resisting the change. She was trying to understand it, trying to let go of the daughter she thought she knew and embrace the son who was finally living in truth. But love, as always, won out. Over time, Cher became one of Chaz's strongest advocates. She spoke out publicly in support of trans rights. She learned, she listened, and most of all, she showed up. Today, their relationship is stronger than ever. "Chaz is so happy now, and we get along better than ever," she said. It wasn't a perfect journey, but it was one filled with growth. For Cher, motherhood was never about getting it all right. It was about refusing to give up, even when it hurt, even when it meant confronting the parts of herself she didn't fully understand. Because behind the icon was always a mother trying, flawed, passionate, and human. The stage was her escape, the spotlight, her armor. But when the music faded and the cameras shut off, Cher was still learning, still loving, still evolving with her children, one painful, beautiful chapter at a time. Now, as Cher approaches 80, her legend is bigger than ever, but the person behind it has never felt more real. She's not just the glittering icon with the towering wigs and timeless voice. She's the woman who survived poverty, betrayal, illness, heartbreak, public failure, and private regret. She's the daughter who bounced from home to home, the teen who dropped out of school and bet her future on a dream, the young wife who handed over control and paid the price, the mother who didn't always get it right but never stopped trying, and the performer who, every time the world told her she was done, refused to believe it. Cher's story is not one of smooth triumph. It's a story of messy, painful, relentless reinvention. A story of scraping yourself off the floor when you've lost your voice, your love, your career, or your strength, and choosing to begin again. She didn't just evolve with the times. She bent the times to fit her. When the music changed, she adapted. When the fashion world shifted, she reinvented. When Hollywood doubted her, she made them applaud. When her children needed her to grow, she did the hard work of showing up differently. She's lived 100 lives in one lifetime. From pop stardom to television comedy, from rock to disco to auto-tuned anthems, from Hollywood rejection to Oscar glory, from media ridicule to becoming a cultural icon. Through it all, she kept moving forward, not to chase relevance, but because standing still was never an option. And maybe that's the real reason we still talk about her. Not just because she's talented, not just because she's unforgettable, but because she's real. She hurts. She fails. She changes. She survives. Again and again. She reminds us that reinvention isn't about hiding who you were. It's about refusing to be defined by it. So the next time you see Cher walk onto a stage in towering heels and sparkling armor, don't just see the star, see the fighter, the survivor. The woman who's lived more lives than most of us can imagine and who, through it all, never stopped being herself. If Cher has ever given you strength through her voice, her story, or her sheer refusal to quit, share that below. What moment in her life moved you most? What does she mean to you? Because the strength behind the spotlight? It's not in the costumes or the comebacks. It's in the courage to keep going when no one's watching.